Okay. So Grant, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Monica. Can everyone see my screen all right?
Yes, perfectly.
All right. All right. I'm Grant Vergottini. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Xcential. This is going to be my 12th summer school. So I'm going to talk today about some of the projects we have underway with Akoma and Ntoso around the world and some of the new advancements we have with our product. First of all, a little bit about Xcential. We were founded in 2002 in San Diego, California, which is where I am right now, almost 20 years ago in a few months. So we've been in this business for quite some time. That whole time we've been dedicated to digital-first legislative drafting and regulatory drafting. So this is what we do. And this is the only thing we do. We've been focused on XML from the start. We've been part of the Akoma and Ntoso family since 2010 LEX summer school, when I attended as a student, and I've been attending it ever since. I'm also an active participant in the OASIS legal document TC with Monica, Fabio, Veronique. Our product is LegisPro. It is a drafting product and includes amending and publishing capabilities. For us, it's our third generation editor. So over 20 years, we've had 3 different editors. This is our most recent one, and it builds on the knowledge that we built up with the previous implementations. The base model underneath it is Akoma and Ntoso. It has an extensive plugin architecture. So we've designed it from the get-go to be a very extensible tool that can be adapted to very many different use cases around the world. So any capability can be taken out and replaced by a different capability if necessary. We offer LegisPro as both an Electron-based desktop application and as a Docker-based web application. So if you want a desktop app, we can provide it. If you want a web app, we can provide it. In fact, it's the same application both ways. Some of the features of LegisPro. There were questions earlier on about word processor like user interface and what capabilities can be offered in an XML editor. We've worked very hard to provide a word processor like user interface. There are, of course, limitations. There are certain things that the end user does have to understand in terms of the structure that they're working with, and that there's a hierarchy that needs to be followed.
Grant, sorry, the mic is chopping. If you can probably refine, because in the post-production of the registration, we can cut this part, but we can continue with the good audio.
Do you want me to go back?
There is a problem with your mic audio.
Let's see. Switch to a different mic. Does that help?
Very. Thank you.
All right. All right. So let me go over some select features of LegisPro. First of all, it has a word processor-like user interface. There were questions earlier about how much you can make an XML editor like a word processor. There are limitations, but we've tried to get as close to being a word processor as possible from a user experience standpoint. So we allow everything that a word processor could offer to be provided within the constraints of it being XML. For instance, you can configure what happens when you press the enter key or shift enter, and you can do that on a contextual basis so that you can define what should be created when you press enter based on the context where the cursor is in the document. We provide all sorts of hierarchical support, so you can promote and demote through the hierarchies, and all the sub-hierarchies will promote and demote accordingly. You can move things in and out of hierarchy, and the tool will automatically take care of all the details, including generating IDs. There's a lot of connectivity that has to be rethought every time you restructure the document, and as much as possible, we automatically handle that behind the scenes. The model is highly configurable to a specific jurisdiction's requirements. We start with the basic Akoma and Ntoso model, and then we build a model within that is tuned to a specific jurisdiction's needs. The structure is correct by construction. So once that model is in place, the tool guides you to always stay within the bounds of that model so that you always end up with a document that is correct. So if you do validate it or run schematron on it with constraints, it'll always be valid just because that's the way the model guides the user. They can't step out of bounds and create something that isn't valid. It has a mechanism to record amendments using a track changes like mechanism like you'd see in Word, but quite a bit more powerful, including the ability to group changes together and record metadata with those groupings of changes. We use CSS for our styling, and we style the XML directly. We don't round trip through HTML. So although we're providing a web-based editor, we're doing it directly with XML, and that ensures that we can be very precise with our XML. We don't end up with little errors, particularly in things like spacing. By sticking to XML as the editing language, we can ensure that we never lose or add any text or space. We support a number of advanced features of Akoma and Ntoso, including the ability to create pseudo elements using the generic elements that Akoma and Ntoso offers. So if you do come up short and there's an element you need that isn't defined in Akoma and Ntoso, by using our pseudo element mechanism and the generic elements in Akoma and Ntoso, you can create a new element. So for instance, we have a sub paragraph that isn't defined in Akoma and Ntoso. We can add a sub paragraph and have it look and feel to the user as a new element type, and they wouldn't know the difference, although underneath we're using generic elements. We also have support for very large documents. Some of our documents might be as large as 10,000 pages, and that's just not practical to use in an editor. So we have large document support where we can extract a portion of a document, edit that portion, and then stitch that portion back into the document. And to do that, we use the portion mechanism of Akoma and Ntoso. We also have a link referencing mechanism for managing all the linkages. I mentioned it earlier, but any references within the document or to other documents all go through something called the resolver, and that conforms to the AKN naming conventions that are defined by the Akoma and Ntoso specification. The underlying database is FusionDB, and that gives us support for Xquery. So we can query into the database, into the documents that are stored in the database, and do very granular things using the Xquery. Xquery is like SQL for an XML document. And then we also have an integrated spelling checker service with custom dictionary, and that uses a third-party tool, Web Spell Checker, that allows us to do on-the-fly spell checking. We've grown a lot in the last year or so, and we now have partners and customers worldwide. These are some of them. The red ones are the Akoma and Ntoso projects that we have underway right now, and then the blue stars are other projects that we have. California was our original customer 20 years ago. We have a big project underway right now in Oregon to implement a full drafting system. We have a project in Nova Scotia that we're just wrapping up right now around regulations. There's a project we've been doing for a few years working with the Commonwealth Secretariat and various parts of the United Nations to track climate change laws. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And we have another project with a partner company down in Mauritius, where we are working with the Attorney General's office to implement Akoma and Ntoso. So right now we have 4 projects underway that are using Akoma and Ntoso around the world, and we are busy training up developers both within Xcential and within our partners. I'm going to talk about some of the select projects that we have underway. In past years, I would talk about projects that I was working on, but now we have a large team. Somewhere between 30 and 40 people are working on different aspects of the system, both within the company and outside. So it's grown substantially over the last almost 18 months. I'm going to talk about some of the legal traditions we're now supporting, automatic generation of amending documents and how we've been extending that, the track changes capabilities we have, how we tag to taxonomies, different approaches we've taken to data conversion. There's been some mention during the day of data conversion. I'll talk about 2 of those. Different approaches we're taking to publishing. We've got some, I think, relatively innovative work going on in publishing, and then how we round trip to legacy tools and word processor type documents, and then some of the stuff we're doing with comparison. So LegisPro from the get-go was built to be a product. And when we say product, is we, rather than focus on a specific jurisdiction's needs, we designed it to be configurable so that we could adapt it to all the different traditions we came across around the world. So it's adaptable, it's extensible, you can add things, and the capabilities that are there are very configurable. As we've gotten to understand the legal traditions that we find around the world, we started to discover that they can be clumped together. There's certain groupings of traditions, and we've chosen to focus on 3 of those. The first one is the US states. US states have a particular way in which they manage legislation, largely coming out of reforms done in California in the 1950s and adopted by other states. With those traditions, you find simplified bills and codes that contain the bulk of the law. The second system is the Westminster-based or UK-derived traditions that we find all over the world, especially English-speaking world. And even the US traditions are derivatives of that down the road. So we're supporting the Westminster-based traditions. And then the third one is US federal, which is just very large, complex systems where you have the US code, you have public laws, and very, very complex bills. And then large variations and complexities in the regulatory space because of the relative autonomy of the various regulatory agencies. So we're building models for each of these, base models for each of these that we can then use and configure for a specific customer within one of these 3 spaces. And so for now, that's going to be our focus. We've been doing automatic generation of bill amendments. Matt earlier was giving a demonstration of bill amendments using page and line numbers and how you use track changes to generate from that. That's something we've been doing for about 12 years now. We've taken that capability and extended it quite extensively to also be able to generate amending bills or amending regulations, bills that are amending the law, whereas bill amendments are proposals to amend a bill. Amending bills and amending regulations are actually amendments to the law. And we're using the same capability with a number of extensions to support generation of those 2. And then another one that we didn't plan on, but which happened anyway, was to use the same capability to automatically generate proclamations in Mauritius. We hadn't even thought of that, but our partner discovered that they could generate proclamations using our bill synthesis or amendment generation capabilities. One particularly advanced feature of LegisPro is something we call change sets. Change sets allow you to make changes in a document with strikeout and insertions, but then group those changes together into sets so that you could have, say, a grouping that are related to a specific policy you're trying to put into effect, or have a specific date or effectivity, and various ways that you can relate these groupings of changes together and add metadata to those groupings. So it takes the track changes capability you see in Microsoft Word or other word processors and adds all sorts of capabilities that you wouldn't find there. So we find a number of use cases for this. It allows us to also track the provenance of changes. So when you have changes layered on top of changes, we can use this mechanism to record what changes came from where and how they layer upon one another. I mentioned that we have a project with the Commonwealth Secretariat and various United Nations agencies. What they're doing, they're using LegisPro to convert laws from around the world into Akoma and Ntoso. And then once they have the laws ingested into the system in Akoma and Ntoso, they then tag against a series of taxonomies they've developed that relate to the 2015 agreement on climate change. There are a number of attorneys in various offices in different locations around the world that are doing that work. And then once all that tagging's done, it's been used to develop a search engine for climate change laws worldwide. In this case, it's our first SaaS, or software as a service implementation. And this is a case where we're hosting the service and they're using it through our web-based application. There's a proposal right now out there to extend it one step further to support Cyrillic and Greek texts. And that's going to be work that is actually done by the Commonwealth Secretariat Office. Data conversion is always one of the biggest problems we face. How do you convert large amounts of existing data? We've come up with two different solutions. The first one is our ad hoc converter. And this is a converter that we can use on the fly to convert documents in ones and twos. When you need to convert some text or a document quickly into Akoma and Ntoso, you can use this tool. It uses a rules-based regular expression system to read the text and then create and then work out the Akoma and Ntoso from reading the text. We use it to convert PDFs or Word documents where you can just cut and paste the text, drop it into the converter, and then it'll produce a Akoma and Ntoso document for you. Matt made a comment earlier that it's not perfect, that their implementation isn't perfect, and neither is ours. This is for a quick conversion when you need to get the data converted rather than going through a complete data conversion. We often refer to this as our good enough converter. For very highly accurate bulk conversions of large amounts of data, we have a different approach where we provide conversion technologies and services. And this allows us to convert all sorts of legacy data. Mainframe data, oftentimes we're upgrading old mainframe systems from the 1980s. And that data has to be brought forward into a modern format. Word processing files, PDFs, which can be quite tricky at times, depending on how those PDFs were structured. And then even legacy XML formats from earlier XML implementations. When we take this approach, we do a very, very, very thorough document analysis. We go through sometimes hundreds of different documents looking for all the variations that are there. And then we have offshore conversion teams that will do the conversion for us, just to make it cost effective. Historically, when it comes to publishing, we've always done XSL FO-based publishing using tools from RenderX and Antenna House. We have extended those capabilities to allow us to back annotate page and line numbers for amending purposes into the XML. And that's been our approach for the last 20 years. In recent years, we've started to notice that interest in XSL FO is waning. And so we've been looking for a new approach. And that new approach is to do CSS-based publishing. So we're in the process of building a new publishing system using Google Puppeteer and Paged.js libraries that take the Akoma and Ntoso XML and it breaks it up into pages and then adds all sorts of annotations so we can figure out where the page and line numbers should go. And then we annotate that afterwards to achieve the same result that we were getting with RenderX and Antenna House in the past. The benefit of this approach is that everything we're using is open source. So it allows us to avoid expensive proprietary tools that we had to put underneath Legis Pro. And it also means that now we have much greater integration between the CSS-based styling we use in the editor and the CSS-based styling we use to actually publish the document. So they can be much more close. They can be much closer in appearance. There's always a lot of discussion on round tripping between word processing documents, and today's been no exception, so I'm going to continue on with the same subject. We find a large need to be able to round trip between various word processing documents, not only Microsoft Word, but also Corel WordPerfect, for various reasons. Sometimes it's because we're moving from a legacy system that used those tools And oftentimes it's because we need to create a distribution copy of the Akoma Ntoso document for distribution to people that won't have access to Legis Pro in offices far and wide. So we've come up with technologies that allow us to do that conversion, taking advantage of the fact that a docx file is a zip file with WordML inside it. And Microsoft Word and WordPerfect both support it in more recent versions of those tools. One thing we did discover is that they're quite a bit different. How they use the WordML is quite a bit different at times. And so we have to take that into account. But being able to round trip is proven to be quite robust. Where we have a lot more problems is taking legacy Word documents that were written any which way and trying to tease out the structure and the true semantic hierarchy of the document. You find a lot of errors in the way in which the document was drafted in Word, and you can see those errors. You can find the mistakes that the user made and how they kind of patched it up to get the right visual appearance, but underneath the structure is quite a mess. And that tends to make things quite a bit more difficult for us. So we have mixed results when bringing in documents, much better results when we're going around round tripping documents, going in and out of documents. Another thing that we've been adding, we're spending a lot of time on lately is comparison technologies. We're working on comparison tools. We have some projects underway that are within projects, not tools that we can sell directly, but we do have some technologies that we've developed. This is smart XML-based comparison, where we have tools that understand the legal structures and how to relate them, rather than just doing a blind comparison of things. So if a provision moves in the document, it'll find it and then difference the provision in its new location, rather than saying it was deleted here and added there. It'll actually be able to show you actually what changed in addition to it having been moved. We're finding numerous use cases for this technology. Something we've explored for years is something called as amends the law, being able to show how a bill is proposed to change the law, and by using the amendments in the law to affect a copy of the existing law. We're also doing it for bill version comparisons, law comparisons, and all sorts of other things. The tools we've developed are based on Google Diff Match Patch, and we've extended that and modified it to work properly with XML tags. So there's a lot of work going on in that area right now. All right, so there's a lot of exciting projects we have in Akoma Ntoso right now around the world at Xcential. I've just mentioned a few of them. There are many more in the planning and proposal stages that hopefully I'll be able to talk about next year. As I said earlier, we've grown steadily over the last few years, particularly over the last 18 months, and the company is now much larger, and we're building very extensively on the foundation laid by Akoma Ntoso. We started down this path over 10 years ago now, and now we're starting to reap the rewards of having been able to play a part in guiding the definition of Akoma Ntoso. So with that, thank you. Are there any questions?
Questions? Do you know about the LaTeX style for legal documents?
Do I know about the
LaTeX styles?
I am aware of it in the past. I haven't explored it.
Okay, never had the problems for conversion of LaTeX documents for tagging them with Akoma Ntoso.
So the LaTeX in principle is a very graphical typography, and it is fixed too much on the presentation and not too much on the semantic of the, let me say, ontological parts of the descriptiveness of the document. So Akoma Ntoso is moving exactly to separate presentation by the content and metadata.
Yes, sure. I was wondering, since different translations from Word exploiting the structure of a document and other formats for typographical formats of documents were mentioned among the problems for dealing with legacies and so on. Just a curiosity. No?
Yeah, we have not explored it. We have focused exclusively on CSS-based presentation. We do have a lot of tricky, complex issues to deal with as we go in and out of Microsoft Word formats.
I can imagine. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm curious to know if you encountered something in these experiences that needed more elements respect the current vocabulary of Akoma Ntoso in terms of legal knowledge to model, not for the processing or coding extraction for application, but really knowledge, legal knowledge that you need.
A lot of as part of our document analysis, we have been diving quite a bit into the processes that the customers have, and there have been some issues. The proposed changes to Akoma Ntoso in the upcoming version reflect a lot of what we've learned. There are still some areas that we have difficulties, particularly when it comes to things like modeling the changes that we see. A lot of the work we do with change sets, we've had to really extend and go beyond what Akoma Ntoso can do. It's not something that is very natural inside of Akoma Ntoso. But the approach we've taken is quite neutral, so it layers on top without damaging the integrity of the Akoma Ntoso documents.
Great.